My father raised his baccarat crystal champagne flute in front of 350 of Manhattan's elite, smiled with practiced, terrifying perfection, and announced to the entire ballroom that I was officially and permanently disinherited. He didn't use those exact, crude words, of course. We were at the Plaza Hotel, after all. He framed it elegantly, as handing the keys of our family's $92 million real estate empire exclusively to my sister, the golden child. He looked right at me from the stage, his gaze carrying a message I had heard my entire life. You are nothing. You are slow. You do not matter. My sister, radiant in an emerald Valentino gown, smirked down at me. My mother simply looked away, adjusting her Cartier bracelet. But as the applause roared through the grand ballroom, deafening and absolute, I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just smiled back at him. Because what my father didn't know, what my sister, my mother, and none of those 350 wealthy guests knew, was that the heavy, red wax-sealed envelope currently burning a hole in my cheap $79 Zara purse was about to legally, completely, and undeniably strip them of every single cent they thought they owned. I held the kill switch to the entire Whitford dynasty in my hands, and the timer had just started ticking. I only had 72 hours to pull the trigger. My name is Dulce Whitford. I'm 28 years old, and for the first 28 years of my life, my family treated me like a terminal disease they were desperately trying to hide from their country club friends. The Whitford name is old money New York. It's the kind of name you find etched deeply into hospital wings, museum donor plaques, and the sprawling marble lobbies of commercial high-rises across the eastern seaboard. My grandmother, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, built Whitford Properties from a single, drafty Brooklyn office in 1965. She had gravel in her gut and a mind like a steel trap. But my father, Gerald Whitford, he didn't build the empire. He merely inherited the throne. And he ran it not with grit, but with a suffocating corporate arrogance. When I was 7 years old, I was diagnosed with severe dyslexia. To me, letters weren't rigid, obedient symbols. They were living things that swam, rotated, and rearranged themselves on the page. Reading a simple paragraph felt like trying to solve a complex Rubik's Cube in a pitch-black room. For a normal, loving family, this is a hurdle you overcome with specialized therapy, patience, and unwavering support. For Gerald and Priscilla Whitford, it was a profound, unforgivable personal embarrassment. In their hyper-competitive, status-obsessed world, your worth was strictly measured by your pedigree and your productivity. My older sister, Miranda, was their masterpiece, their ultimate ROI. By the time she was 12, she had a $400 an hour Princeton graduate tutoring her for the SATs. She was fluent in conversational French, played the violin at Juilliard standards, and possessed a ruthless, cutting ambition that mirrored my father's perfectly. She was sharp, calculating, and exactly the heir he wanted. I remember being 12 years old, sitting at the massive mahogany dining table, struggling through a middle school history assignment. I asked my mother if I could perhaps get a reading specialist, someone who understood how my brain worked. She didn't look up from her iPad. She just sighed, the overwhelming scent of her Chanel No. 5 suffocating the air around me. Dulce, we've already spent so much time and money on this, she said, her voice dripping with exhausted pity. At some point, we just have to accept reality. Some children aren't built for greatness. You don't have the intellect for the family business. You'll find a nice, simple life somewhere. We'll make sure you have a modest trust so you don't starve. I was a child. I believed her. When the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally tell you that you are fundamentally broken, you internalize it. So, I learned to adapt in the shadows. I became the glass child, transparent, unseen, easily shattered but entirely ignored. I devoured audiobooks instead of paperbacks. I created intricate, massive visual flowcharts, mind maps, and diagrams to understand complex concepts without relying on dense text. I became a silent observer. Because when people think you're slow, they stop filtering themselves around you. They treat you like a piece of furniture, and furniture hears absolutely everything. There was only one person in the Whitford dynasty who actually saw me, Grandma Eleanor. Every Sunday afternoon, while my parents were hosting lavish networking galas they intentionally forgot to invite me to, I would take the rattling subway train down to her Upper West Side apartment. It smelled of old paper, Earl Grey tea, and authority. Eleanor was a force of nature. Even in her mid-80s, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her eyes held the kind of fierce, unyielding intellect that could terrify a boardroom of men in suits into complete submission. She didn't look at my dyslexia as a failure. She saw it as a different operating system, a strategic advantage disguised as a flaw. She would spread out massive, complex commercial real estate contracts on her antique dining table documents dating back to the 1970s, the foundational blueprints of our family's wealth. "You read slower than most, Dooley," she told me once, her frail, age-spotted hand covering my trembling fingers. "But because you have to work 10 times harder to see the words, you see the patterns everyone else completely misses. Your father reads a contract looking for loopholes to exploit. He looks for the quick win. You read a contract like an architect. You see how the foundation is built. You see where the load-bearing walls are. Never let them tell you that you are less. You are just playing a longer game." But Grandma Eleanor saw something else, too. She saw what my father was becoming. She saw the greed rotting the core of the company she had bled to build. And in March 2018, 3 years before she died of pancreatic cancer, she called me into her study. She handed me a small, incredibly heavy mahogany box with tarnished brass hinges. "Take this, hide it, and do not open it yet," she whispered, her grip surprisingly strong, her voice tight with a warning I couldn't yet comprehend. "Your father is going to try to break you, Dulce. He is going to try to take everything. When he shows you exactly who he is, and when he leaves you with absolutely nothing, that is the exact moment you open this box, not a second before." I hid the box in the back of my closet. 3 years later, I held her hand as she took her last breath in a sterile hospice room. My father was too busy with a merger to be there. Miranda sent flowers. I was the only one who stayed. Fast forward to 2024. I was 28 years old, living in a cramped, drafty apartment in Queens with 2 roommates, working as a lowly administrative assistant at Whitford Properties. My father had generously given me a job out of college to maintain the illusion of a supportive family. My salary? A humiliating $42,000 a year in New York City. Miranda's starting salary as the newly minted chief legal counsel for the same company? $280,000, plus a lucrative executive bonus structure. My daily corporate routine consisted of making coffee, unjamming the massive Xerox machine, and organizing historical archives for junior executives. But while I was organizing those dusty archives, I was reading. One rainy Tuesday in late April, I noticed something deeply alarming in a new acquisition contract Miranda had drafted for a waterfront property. Because of my visual mapping habit, I saw a fatal flaw in the liability clause, a loophole that could cost the company millions in environmental cleanup fees. Thinking I was helping, I printed the page, highlighted the structural error, and walked into Miranda's glass-walled corner office. She was on speakerphone with a vendor, getting her nails filed by an assistant. "Miranda, I was filing the Hudson River contract, and I think there's a serious exposure risk in Section 4, I said softly. She muted her phone. The manicurist stopped filing. Miranda slowly looked up at me, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. She stood up, walked around her massive mahogany desk, snatched the paper from my hands, and dropped it directly into the shredder without even glancing at it. "You are a file clerk, Dulce," she said, her voice dropping to a vicious, quiet hiss so the rest of the floor wouldn't hear. "You can barely read a restaurant menu without getting a headache. Do not ever walk into my office and presume to audit my legal work again. You are here out of pity. Do not make me regret my charity. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the familiar, suffocating shame threatening to drown me. I nodded silently and backed out of the office. 2 hours later, the email arrived. The subject line read, "Position restructuring, confidential. Dear Miss Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current administrative position will be eliminated effective July 1st. You will be escorted off the premises by security at 5 p.m. today. Human Resources will contact you regarding your severance options. We thank you for your service." They weren't just firing me, they were throwing me out like a trespasser. At 4:45 p.m., a towering security guard stood by my cubicle as I packed my cheap coffee mug and my framed photo of Grandma Eleanor into a cardboard box. The entire floor watched in awkward, suffocating silence. As I walked toward the service elevator because I was no longer authorized to use the executive one, I had to pass my father's corner office. The door was cracked open just an inch. Through the ridiculously thin drywall, I heard them. Gerald and my mother, Priscilla. "It had to be done today, Gerald?" my mother asked, sipping from a crystal tumbler. "Security escort? Really?" "Miranda requested it," my father's voice sneered, the clinking of ice in his Scotch glass echoing in the void. Dulce was overstepping. "It's embarrassing, Pris. Having the future CEO's sister pretending she understands commercial real estate? Investors will ask what's wrong with her mentally. It tanks our credibility." "I know, Gerald," my mother murmured smoothly, sounding utterly indifferent to my destruction. "Just give her a tiny severance, 6 months minimum wage. Make her sign an NDA. She can move to the Midwest, go work at a bakery or something suited to her pace. We have to protect Miranda's brand. Dulce is a liability we can no longer afford to subsidize." My own mother, my own father. To them, I wasn't a struggling daughter. I was an infected limb that needed amputating before the gala. I went home to Queens that night, clutching my cardboard box, completely broken. I pulled the heavy mahogany box from the dark recesses of my closet, blew off the dust, and realized the time had finally come. Which brings us back to that night, May 15th, the Plaza Hotel. The air was thick with the scent of expensive orchids and the intoxicating musk of untouchable wealth. It was Miranda's graduation from Harvard Law School and her unofficial coronation as the future queen of Manhattan real estate. I was seated at table 27. If you know anything about Manhattan gala seating charts, you know table 27 is a violent, silent insult. It was strategically placed behind a massive, view-obstructing marble pillar, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen where the waitstaff rushed in and out, clattering dishes. I was wearing a simple, black $79 Zara dress, sitting alone. My mother had intercepted me at the coat check earlier. Her manicured fingers had clamped onto my arm like a vice grip. "Is that really what you chose to wear to a plaza event?" she had hissed, her eyes scanning my outfit with undisguised disgust. "Listen to me, Dulce. You are only here because your absence would raise questions. Do not speak to the press. Do not eat like you've been starved. This is Miranda's moment. I want you to be entirely invisible." I was invisible. I sat in the shadows, sipping lukewarm water, watching the gilded elite of the city kiss the rings of my family. Then, the 1-2 piece orchestra faded out. A spotlight hit the main stage. My father stepped up to the microphone, radiating absolute, tyrannical authority. The room fell dead silent. He praised Miranda's flawless intellect, her ruthless ambition, her sheer perfection. He spoke about the legacy of Whitford Properties, entirely omitting my grandmother's struggle to build it. And then, he dropped the hammer that would sever my bloodline. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald boomed, his chest puffed out, staring directly into the crowd. "We build foundations meant to last centuries. To do that, you must entrust the architecture to the strongest pillar. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate. Furthermore, upon my retirement next spring, she will be named the sole chief executive officer of Whitford Properties. She is the only future of this family." The room erupted into a standing ovation. Flashes from cameras blinded the room. I sat there, pinned to my chair at table 27, effectively, legally, and publicly erased from my own family lineage. My chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs would crack. But as the applause reached its deafening peak, the shadows near the kitchen doors shifted. A man in a sharp, impeccably tailored dark gray suit slipped through the crowd. He bypassed the billionaires, the politicians, and the socialites, moving with the silent, terrifying grace of an executioner. He walked straight through the dark periphery of the room to table 27. He didn't introduce himself immediately. He just placed a heavy, cream-colored envelope on the white tablecloth right next to my water glass. The wax seal bore the deep red stamp of Morrison and Blake, one of the most exclusive, ruthless, and terrifying law firms on the East Coast. "Miss Whitford?" the man asked softly, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a scalpel. "My name is Jonathan Ellis. I was your grandmother Eleanor's personal attorney." I stared at the envelope, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I looked up at the stage. My father was shaking hands, laughing. He hadn't seen. "Why today?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why wait until I've lost everything?" Jonathan Ellis offered a small, chillingly knowing smile. He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a breath. "Because your grandmother said, when he finally takes it all away from her, the fear will be gone. And then, she will be ready to burn his house down." He tapped the envelope once, turned on his heel, and vanished back into the sea of tuxedos. I left the gala immediately, slipping out through the kitchen service exit. I ran through the rainy streets of Manhattan, the damp cold seeping into my cheap dress, until I reached the safety of my apartment. I sat on my bed, my hands shaking violently as I broke the thick wax seal of the envelope. Beside it, I opened the mahogany box my grandmother had given me 6 years ago. Inside the envelope was a legal document, the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, dated the 12th of September 2019. My breath caught in my throat. I knew corporate law basics from my time in the archives. My father had taken control of the company using a will dated 2015. This document was executed 4 years after the one my father possessed. Under New York state law, a newer, valid will automatically, completely, and irrevocably revokes all prior testamentary documents. I read the words, my dyslexia forcing me to trace each line slowly with my finger, letting the monumental, earth-shattering reality of the text sink into my bones. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind, hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents. To my granddaughter, Dulce Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my founder's shares in Whitford Properties LLC, along with absolute, unmitigated voting rights. I stopped breathing. 51%. Controlling interest. My grandmother hadn't just left me a trust fund. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me the entire kingdom. The will continued, a final, crushing blow from beyond the grave, written with Eleanor's signature venom. I make this bequest with full knowledge of my son Gerald's cruelty. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned by the people meant to protect her. I will not allow my legacy to be managed by a man who evaluates human worth solely by arrogance and Ivy League degrees. Dulce is the only one who sees the architecture. She is the rightful heir. But there was a catch, a massive, terrifying catch embedded in the legal jargon. Condition. To activate this bequest, Dulce must formally petition the board of directors for an emergency session and present this document within 72 hours of receipt. Failure to act within this exact window will render this will permanently null and void, and the assets shall revert to the 2015 arrangement. 72 hours. Grandma Eleanor knew me better than I knew myself. She knew that if she gave me a month or a year, my anxiety and my lifelong, deeply ingrained conditioning to be the good, quiet, obedient girl, would convince me to back down. I would make excuses for them. I would hide. The deadline wasn't a punishment. It was a catalyst. It was a loaded gun with a timer on the trigger. I looked inside the mahogany box. Beneath the velvet lining was a sleek, modern USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop. It contained a single audio file labeled Board, Meeting, March 2018, Wave. I clicked play. The audio was slightly muffled, clearly recorded covertly from a device inside someone's purse. But the voices were unmistakable. It was a closed-door executive board meeting. My father's voice slithered through the laptop speakers. Listen to me. Eleanor is 81 years old. She's losing her mind. She doesn't understand modern corporate structuring. I moved to strip her voting rights from 51% down to 10% immediately, for her own good. We need to push her out before she tanks the valuation. A pause. Then my grandmother's voice, cold as liquid nitrogen. I am sitting right here, Gerald, and my mind is perfectly fine. He had tried to betray his own mother. He had tried to steal her power while she was still breathing, using the exact same excuse he used on me, claiming she was mentally unfit, and she had recorded it. Now, she was handing the executioner's axe directly to me. May 18th, 9:45 a.m. Exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes before the 72-hour deadline expired. The rain was lashing against the glass exterior of Whitford Tower as I walked through the revolving doors. My shoes were soaked. I wasn't wearing Prada or Chanel. I was wearing an oversized thrift store gray blazer and carrying a scuffed $12 leather portfolio. Marcus, the head lobby security guard who had personally escorted me out of the building with a cardboard box just 3 days ago, stepped in front of the turnstiles. He looked deeply uncomfortable. Miss Whitford, Dulce, you know I can't let you up. Your keycard has been deactivated. Your father left strict orders. I didn't have to say a word. From the leather lounge area of the lobby, Margaret Coleman rose to her feet. Margaret was 72 years old, owned 15% of Whitford properties, and had been my grandmother's oldest, most terrifying friend. She walked over, her silver cane tapping rhythmically against the marble floor. She's with me, Marcus, Margaret said, her voice raspy but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. And if Gerald has a problem with a senior board member bringing a guest to an emergency session, he can come down to the lobby and tell me himself in front of the morning commuters. Marcus swallowed hard and stepped aside. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 48 seconds. I watched the digital numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. With every floor, the terrified, dyslexic, invisible girl I had been for 28 years fell away, replaced by the architect my grandmother had trained me to be. When the doors slid open on the 42nd floor, Miranda was waiting outside the massive double doors of the main boardroom. She looked like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine in a tailored, razor-sharp navy power suit. She was scrolling through her phone, but when she looked up and saw me stepping out of the elevator, her smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second before hardening into an ugly, condescending sneer. She marched right up to me, physically blocking the heavy mahogany doors. "Are you literally insane, Dulce?" Miranda hissed, looking me up and down like I was a cockroach on her expensive carpet. "Security threw you out on the street. Did you seriously come crawling back up here to cry to HR? To beg for your health insurance? Or did you just leave a stapler in your sad little cubicle?" I looked at my sister, the golden child. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, chilling pity. Before I could answer, the boardroom doors swung open. My father, Gerald, stepped out. His face, usually a mask of composed, corporate supremacy, flushed with intense, vibrating rage when he saw me. He looked at his platinum Rolex. "What is this? What is she doing here?" Gerald demanded, turning his furious gaze to Margaret. "Margaret, this is a restricted executive session. It does not concern former clerical staff. Dulce, get back in that elevator right now before I have the police arrest you for corporate trespassing. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop embarrassing this family." Margaret didn't flinch. She leaned on her cane and smiled a cold reptilian smile. "Actually, Gerald, it concerns her entirely. I filed the emergency petition on her behalf. She has standing. Let her in. Or, I will call the Wall Street Journal right now and tell them the CEO of Whitford Properties is illegally barring a shareholder representative from an emergency proceeding." My father's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. A vein pulsed visibly in his temple, but he couldn't deny a senior board member who held a massive chunk of the company's equity. He stepped aside, his eyes promising sheer, unadulterated violence. "Fine," he whispered to me as I walked past him. "You want to be humiliated in front of the entire board? I will gladly oblige." The boardroom was a fortress of polished walnut, Italian leather, and silent intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling Manhattan skyline, shrouded in storm clouds. 12 board members sat around the massive oval table. I knew them all from the archives. The sycophants, my father's golfing buddies who rubber-stamped his every move. And the old guard, the few remaining contemporaries of my grandmother. My father marched to his seat at the head of the table, the ultimate, untouchable patriarch. Miranda stood right behind his chair, crossing her arms, smirking at me like I was a lost, delusional child about to be scolded. I walked to the very opposite end of the table, the unassigned seat, the children's table. I placed my $12 portfolio down. The chairman of the board, an older man named Robert Hartley, struck his silver pen against a glass. "This emergency session is called to order. Margaret, you requested this time. You have the floor." But before Margaret could speak, my father raised his hand. He wasn't just going to dismiss me. He was going to use my presence to elevate himself. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Mr. Chairman, if I may, before Margaret speaks, I need to address the absolute absurdity of this situation," Gerald boomed, his voice dripping with patronizing authority. "As you all know, I recently made the difficult decision to terminate my daughter Dulce's employment. It breaks my heart as a father, but as a CEO, I must protect this company. Dulce suffers from severe learning disabilities. She has zero financial training. She was wildly incompetent at menial administrative tasks. What you are witnessing today is a troubled, jealous young woman, acting out because her brilliant sister Miranda was rightfully named my successor at the gala." Miranda nodded solemnly behind him, playing the part of the burdened superior sibling flawlessly. "We are on the verge of acquiring the Hudson River waterfront properties," my father continued, pacing slightly, completely high on his own arrogance. "Under my leadership, and soon under Miranda's, this company will double its valuation. We do not have time for the temper tantrums of a disgruntled former file clerk. I ask that the board disregard whatever nonsense Margaret has brought her here to say, and that security remove her immediately so we can get back to making millions of dollars." He sat back down. Several of his cronies nodded in agreement. The CFO, a man named Richard, actually chuckled. I let the echo of my father's lies fade into the vast room. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't launch into an emotional tirade defending my intelligence. I let him dig the grave as deep as he possibly could. Then, I looked at Margaret. She nodded. I stood up. I slowly unzipped my scuffed portfolio. I pulled out the heavy, cream-colored document with the red wax seal. I didn't hand it to my father. I slid it down the long, polished mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of Chairman Hartley. "I am not here to discuss my reading comprehension, Gerald," I said. My voice was eerily calm. It wasn't the voice of the frightened girl they knew. It was Eleanor's voice. And I am not here to ask for my job back. I am here to execute the final, legally binding, last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, drafted and notarized in September 2019. The room froze. The silence was so profound, so absolute, it felt like the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped. Effective as of 72 hours ago, I continued, my eyes locking onto my father's. I own 51% of the founder's voting shares. I am the absolute majority owner of Whitford Properties. My father's face drained of blood, turning a sickly, translucent shade of gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Miranda, however, shattered. Her perfectly curated composure completely dissolved into raw, unfiltered panic. She lunged forward, slamming both her hands flat on the mahogany table. "That is a lie!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That is a disgusting forgery! Grandma left everything to Dad in the 2015 trust. You made this in the copy room, you psycho. You're going to federal prison for fraud." From the back corner of the room, near the coat closet, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Jonathan Ellis, the terrifying attorney from the gala. He walked calmly to the table and opened his leather briefcase. "I am Jonathan Ellis, senior partner at Morrison & Blake," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute legal finality. "I personally drafted, witnessed, and notarized this document with Mrs. Eleanor Whitford in 2019. It legally and completely supersedes the 2015 arrangement. It is absolute, irrefutable, and already filed with the Surrogates Court of the State of New York." Chairman Hartley put on his reading glasses. He opened the document. As he read the clauses, his eyes widened. Gerald suddenly stood up, knocking his heavy, expensive leather chair violently backward. He was hyperventilating now. The untouchable CEO was unraveling in real time. "This is garbage," Gerald yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "My mother was sick. She was elderly. She was 82 years old and completely out of her mind. I will tie this up in probate court for a decade, Dulce. I will bury you in legal fees. You manipulated a dying, demented woman into signing a piece of paper she didn't understand." He looked around the table at the board members, desperately trying to rally his troops, playing the ultimate victim card. "You all knew her at the end," he pleaded, his voice cracking with fake emotion. "It broke my heart to see her decline. She was paranoid. She was hallucinating. I had to step in and take control of the 2015 trust to protect this company from her deteriorating mental state. She was completely insane." I let him finish. I let the board members absorb his passionate, desperate lie. Then, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I placed it gently on the table. "Is that true, Dad?" I asked quietly. "Did you protect her from a deteriorating mind? Or did you just try to execute a hostile takeover against your own mother and fail?" I tapped play. I had connected my phone to the boardroom's central Bluetooth audio system before the meeting started. The crisp, undeniable audio filled the entire room, broadcasting from the ceiling speakers. It was my father's voice, from the covert recording in March 2018. "Listen to me," the recorded Gerald hissed. "Eleanor is 81 years old. She's losing her mind. She doesn't understand modern corporate structuring. I moved to strip her voting rights from 51% down to 10% immediately, for her own good. We need to push her out before she tanks the valuation." A heavy pause on the tape, and then my grandmother's voice, sharp, clear, and dripping with venom. "I am sitting right here, Gerald, and my mind is perfectly, brilliantly fine. If you ever try to steal my life's work behind my back again, I will make sure you leave this world with nothing but the suit on your back." I paused the recording. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It was the sound of an empire changing hands. The sycophants who had nodded along with my father just 10 minutes ago were now staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with him. Richard, the CFO, slowly pushed his chair slightly away from Gerald. They all knew a sinking ship when they saw one. I stared dead into my father's panicked, terrified, bloodshot eyes. "She wasn't losing her mind, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, echoing whisper. "She was the smartest person in the room. She just finally saw exactly who you really were. She recorded you trying to steal her life's work while she was still breathing. And she wrote this 2019 will to ensure you would never, ever get away with it. I looked over at Miranda. She was backed against the glass wall, a hand over her mouth, hyperventilating. The golden child, realizing that the gold was fake and the bank was empty. You told everyone I couldn't read, Gerald, I said, standing up, placing my hands on the table. But you forgot one thing. I don't read words. I read architecture. And I just dismantled yours. The board's legal counsel spent a grueling, agonizing 45 minutes on the phone verifying the documents with the state courts and Chase private client. During that time, Gerald paced the room like a caged, terrified animal. Miranda sat in the corner, chewing off her expensive manicure, realizing her entire future had just evaporated. When the lawyer finally returned to the boardroom, he wouldn't even look my father in the eye. He looked at Chairman Hartley and nodded slowly, decisively. The will is ironclad, the lawyer stated flatly. There is no legal avenue to contest it given the audio evidence of prior malicious intent from the former beneficiary. The 2015 will is void. Dulce Whitford holds 51% of the voting shares. She controls the company. Chairman Hartley folded his hands. He took off his glasses. He looked at me, no longer seeing a fired copy room assistant, but the apex predator of the room, Miss Whitford. As absolute majority shareholder, do you have a formal motion to present regarding executive leadership? Miranda was sobbing quietly in the corner, her makeup running, her Ivy League degrees entirely useless in the face of absolute, undeniable justice. My father stood frozen at the head of the table. He looked broken, defeated. He was waiting for me to scream at him. He was waiting for me to formally fire him, to humiliate him, to strip him of his dignity the way he had stripped me of mine for 28 years. He was waiting for me to act exactly like him. I stood up. I looked around the room at the empire my grandmother built. I thought about the glass child I used to be. I motioned for a formal board vote of no confidence in Gerald Whitford as chief executive officer. I stated clearly, if the board votes no confidence, he will not be fired. He will be given 30 days to quietly tender his resignation, with his public dignity intact. No media circus. No scandalous press release. If the board votes to keep him, I will step back as a silent partner. I didn't execute him. I didn't need to. I put his fate entirely in the hands of the board of directors, the very people he had abused, belittled, and bullied for years. I gave them the weapon, and I gave them the choice. The vote took less than 2 minutes. 7 hands went up. It was a majority. 0 confidence. My father was out. He lost the company, his status, his entire identity. And he lost it not because I was vindictive, but because I simply brought the undeniable truth into the light, and the truth was his ultimate ruin. As I walked out of that boardroom, finally breathing free air, my mother grabbed my arm in the hallway. Her face was frantic, mascara running down her cheeks. Dulce, sweetheart, please, we're your family. We love you. We can fix this. You don't have to do this to us. I stopped. I looked at the woman who had told me to accept a life of nothingness, who had agreed to throw me out on the street to protect a PR image. I gently removed her trembling hand from my sleeve. No, Priscilla, I said softly, feeling the phantom weight of my grandmother's hand on my shoulder. You're not my family. You're just people I used to know. Today I sit on the board of directors. I don't run the day-to-day operations. I hired a brilliant, empathetic, and highly qualified CEO to do that. But I guide the architecture of the company as the Director of Sustainable Development. I took my $42,000 salary and replaced it with an 8-figure dividend. My sister Miranda, the golden child, she had to leave her high-powered corporate law firm due to the immense social fallout and embarrassment in our circles. She now works at a mid-level practice in New Jersey, finally learning what it actually means to work from the bottom up without daddy's money paving the way. My father retired to a condo in Florida. We haven't spoken a single word in 2 years. If you are listening to this right now, and you have ever been the glass child, the one your family overlooked, The one they mocked. The one they told was too slow, too weird, too emotional, or too broken to amount to anything. Listen to me very carefully. Your worth is not defined by the people who are too blind, too toxic, or too arrogant to see it. Sometimes, the traits they call your greatest weaknesses, your sensitivity, your quiet observation, your different way of processing the world are actually the very tools you need to tear down their toxic empires. Keep watching, keep learning, keep building your architecture in the dark. Because when the lights finally come on, and you reveal what you've been building, they won't even know what hit them. If my story resonated with you, if you've survived a toxic family dynamic, narcissistic parents, or a golden child sibling and come out stronger on the other side, I want you to comment the word justice down below. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because this channel is dedicated to the stories of people who took their power back when everyone else counted them out. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, stay quiet, stay smart, and never let them write your story.